to plug leakages and shore up revenue, the federal government has directed the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation to immediately commence the presidential directives on 50% automatic deduction from the internally generated revenue of federal government-owned enterprises. The directive was contained in a circular issued by Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun. According to the circular, all partially funded federal government agencies, parastatals, should remit 50% of their gross IGR, while all statutory revenues like tender fees, contractors' registration, and sales of government assets, among others, should be remitted 100% to the recurrent account. The circular further directed the OAGF to open new Treasury single account TSA sub-accounts for all federal agencies, parastatals listed on the Schedule of Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007 and any additions by the Federal Ministry of Finance. Revenue. Rufai.
I mean, kudos to the government. You see, when the government does well, we'll say it the way it is. Kudos to this government on following the TSA that was laid down by the Goodluck Jonathan administration. And kudos to them. President Buhari also tried, but, had challenges along the way because of non-compliance. But kudos to the federal government on this because we need the revenue. And the problem has always been about the MDS. It's not that they don't make the revenue, but what's the accountability for the revenue? A lot of them have many sub-accounts that does not even tie back to the original account of the government. And guess what happened? Because of that, we lose revenue. It's so easy to be corrupt. It's so easy to fritter away money. But now they're saying for government agencies that are fully funded by the government, 100% of all the revenue goes back to the sub-accounts, the TSA account that are linked to the Grand TSA account and the consolidated revenue account. And also, for those that are partially funded, about 50% of the IGR goes back. So you have a money trail. While this directive was first made, a lot of people made exemptions, for the universities, saying that, hey, they did not make enough. And I think they had come out to say initially that the universities will be waived. I don't know if this full implementation absolves the universities from this. But this is a good one. This is laudable. We need to be able to track the finances of government. Apart from this circular, and I also like the fact that they say there will be heavy sanctions meted out to those that violate this. We are waiting for those sanctions. Because only recently we saw the brazen disrespect for this directive, where the government official from MDA was found complicit in a case of corruption or alleged complicit in the case of corruption. Because if everything goes to the TSA, we'll have less allegations of complicity in corruption. So I'm happy about this. Right on to Tinubu's government.
All right, thanks.
Well, very quickly. To the extent that this initiative that has been adopted by the federal government of Nigeria is to plug leakages, to shore up revenue, to ensure fiscal discipline, to ensure accountability and transparency, and to block wastages and leakages in the revenue drive of the federal government of Nigeria. In other words, this is an attempt by the Tinubu administration to plug the holes, to close the corruption highway in government, and to strengthen the revenue recruitment generation process of government. To that extent, this is a commendable move. Number two, it is now clear to me, in one regard, when the Minister of Finance and the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, said the other day after the National Assembly signing the 2024 budget into law, that, look, the objective of the Tinubu administration is to generate more revenue, not necessarily to borrow. Now, this again explains, puts in better, light what he was actually saying. What they are trying to do is to track the money, follow the money, and take the money. Now, the story that came out there is to say, oh, well, they have abandoned the Treasury single account. That's not exactly what they have done. What they have done, in my view, is to address a leaking basket or baskets within the revenue generation framework of the Nigerian government. And I'll dial back in history. Now, during the Jonathan administration, the Ministry of Finance and Coordinating Ministry of Finance under Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala carried out a system-wide probe of revenue accruing to the government of Nigeria. And it was discovered that many of these ministries, departments, and agencies and their contractors, they will collect money, they will not remit to the federal government of Nigeria. Many of these ministries, departments, and agencies, they have accounts, bank accounts that are unknown to the federal government of Nigeria. And those accounts, they operate independently. They do not give money to the federal government. How do you run a country if MDAs that are funded either partially or fully by the federal government of Nigeria do not remit money back into the account? And they are revenue generating MDAs of government. That was the problem at the time. So the Jonathan administration then came up with this idea of the Treasury single account. Also came up with the idea of IPs to eliminate ghosts within the system. For you to get money from the federal government as salary, you have to be documented by government. So that was what the Jonathan administration did. However, what I suspect is that the Tinubu administration must have seen that those resilient, corrupt persons within the Nigerian system, in the MDAs, they probably found a way around it. And now that's what they are trying to plug. And that is why their approach is commendable, to stop the thieves bleeding Nigeria, including those contractors who take contracts from these MDAs. There are some categories of contracts. There was a document prepared by one of those agencies. Don't let me say those things in public. Those are government secrets that you can't keep disclosing. But there was a study. We checked and discovered that some of these contractors that have special arrangements with government, they will say, oh, okay, they cannot return 50% to the Nigerian government because they faced extraordinary circumstances. And year upon year, no money will be remitted to the federal government. Even when it is clear those people are in business, they've not declared bankruptcy, they've not declared force majeure. The people are so privileged in Nigeria that the Nigerian government cannot go after them. With this new system that the Tinubu administration is introducing, if he stands by it, if he can summon the courage, if he can dare the lions, the hyenas, the snakes taking Nigerian money, then, of course, you will be able to realize the objective of generating more revenue, because half of the money of Nigeria goes into people's hands. Let's look at the measures that the Tinubu administration is proposing. He's saying that if you are partially funded by the Nigerian government, you will return 50% every month of your IGR, including the sale of tender funds, including sale of assets, and then on a regular basis, you will be giving reports to the office of the Accountant General of the Federation to ensure transparency and accountability. And that office of the Accountant General is being empowered, which is also a good thing, because that's an office that has just been there like a decorative piece in the Nigerian system. And hence you have Accountant Generals of Nigeria making away with billions of taxpayers' money, of public money. Number two, the government is saying that if you are fully funded, then you will refund all your proceeds 100% to the Nigerian government, including sale of government assets, including sale of whatever tender offers, whatever money you give to the Nigerian government. Number three, which is what people are interpreting as the abandonment of the TSA account, is that the office of the Accountant General of the Federation has now been empowered to create sub-recurrent accounts. these sub-recurrent accounts, monies paid there, will be put into the Consolidated Federation Fund. Right? So the Consolidated Revenue Fund, the CRF, will now be the holding spot. Not all these accounts that various MDAs have opened that are operated by ministers and heads of departments and agencies illegally. I think it takes a lot of courage for the Tinubu administration to say, we are closing those accounts. The word they use is that those accounts have now been blocked. And any proceeds will be monitored by the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. However, what is important is to ensure enforce strict compliance. Under the previous administration, the number of MDAs captured under the Finance Act were reduced from 65 to 68. The present administration now has increased again to 68 in order to capture more revenue. But they need to ensure strict compliance, and they need to ensure that any form of violation is dealt with. They need to monitor that all those illegal accounts, some ministries, departments, and agencies having like 10, 15 different accounts that are unknown to the Nigerian government, and yet the heads of those MDAs operate them. Now, anybody that is found still operating those accounts should be made to face the full wrath of the law. The nonsense has gone on for too long. So what the Tinubu administration is trying to do in this regard, follow the money, track the money, bring the revenue into the common pool, and make sure that people do not continue to feed fat. And I think in this particular regard, we may note it until we see how they do it, that the Tinubu administration has listened that, look, the way to fight corruption is not just going about harassing people up and down. It's also about strengthening the system, institutions, to make sure that leakages and wastages and what Ato M. Okun calls in a famous essay, the leaky basket is breached, so that it doesn't leak anymore. Not in a magical manner, but by strengthening the appropriate institutions. So this is a welcome development, but we'll see how it is operationalized.
Absolutely welcome development, and the key area here is in the implementation, because this is not the first time, as has already been highlighted, that a government has established, or an administration has highlighted the fact that MDAs are failing to remit to the federal government account, the TSA in this instance. But what's happened in the past is that whilst there are threats to take very tough actions against defaulting MDAs, this hasn't served as a deterrent yet. As far back as, well, just 2021, the chairman of the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, Mr. Mukora at the time, had come out to say that 1.2 trillion naira hadn't been remitted by MDAs. In fact, he said that after the TSA, over 2 trillion naira was recovered, but even after that, they hadn't been able to recover amounts, surpluses from these MDAs, and mainly he pegged it at the defects of the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007, that there are certain changes that ought to be made. And so whilst this is a welcome development by the Minister of Finance and coordinating Minister of the Economy, it must also be said that legislature that provides for this accountability must be looked into, so that the defects that give loopholes for these agencies to default again and again is addressed. Beyond that, perhaps make a scapegoat of one or two heads of MDAs, of ministries, departments and agencies, because oftentimes when investigations are done, we know these agencies that are defaulting. We know the agencies who are operating private accounts that the government is not, that's away from the government coffers. We know these agencies. The best deterrent and the best way to implement or to ensure compliance when a directive or a circular is given is by ensuring that there's commensurate punitive measures for defaulting agencies. So whilst this is welcome, but I must highlight that during the Buhari administration, he'd mentioned this, during the Jonathan administration, it had been highlighted. So what would the Tinubu administration do differently beyond the release of circulars and saying that they will face penalties? They've been saying this for a while now. So, but again, not wanting to kill the initiative or kill the enthusiasm before it's actually implemented. Perhaps the call this morning from me is that beyond the announcements, beyond the circular, is to ensure that there are punitive measures for defaulting agencies, and hopefully this would help shore up revenue for financing this year's budget, and perhaps would also translate to less borrowing, as is the ambition of the minister and of course the president and this administration. Well, barring any last-minute change, former president of Sierra Leone, Ernest Koroma, would arrive Nigeria today to begin a political asylum. The former president, who was investigated for his role in a botched coup d'etat, was found culpable of complicity. A signed public notice by Sierra Leonean Minister of Information and Civic Education, Cherno Ba, disclosed the development. However, in what seemed like a soft landing for former president, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, succeeded in getting political asylum for him in Nigeria, where he is expected to be housed for some time. All right, Rufai, we might be receiving an august visitor providing asylum for former President Koroma.
I mean, yeah, we all know the political situation in Sierra Leone, and that's why we should be careful about elections, because all of this happened after elections that a lot of people at the opposition claimed that were not rightly done, that led to the emergence of Madabio as president. The elections had a lot of challenges. And when elections have a lot of challenges, it gives room to a lot of actors. But we must also call on that actors that a forceful regime change is not nice. It's not good. We totally condemn it. Like Thomas Isodore Noe Shankara will always say, Abba, down with it. Coup d'etat, Abba. Abba. We can't have it. It's not nice. And we heard that push of a suspected coup in Sierra Leone. Although some other players have said that this, when African leaders cry foul of a coup, is a consolidation too of power. They try to use the consolidated power to round off their opponents and totally stifle opponents. Some opposition people to have advanced that course. But the government of Sierra Leone had its evidence and they put it out there. And part of those that were found complicit was Ernest Bai Koroma as the former president of Sierra Leone. Let me now take you historically. This is not the first time Nigeria will always act as a big brother to be able to de-escalate tensions and bring people in warring factions to come live here. My memory serves me right. One of the very first one that happened was around 1995 with Sia Barre. And Sia Barre came, then in what is disputed to be Somalia today. And Sia Barre lived here for a while before he passed. Also, we all remember the case of Charles Taylor out of Liberia. And that case was even clumsy to the extent that at some point he tried escaping through Calabar before he was apprehended. So we've always had people like that. So if the African Union and the African bodies are saying that Ernest Bai Koroma should come to Nigeria to settle things politically, to grant him political asylum, he's welcomed. But the question is, after Koroma comes to Nigeria, what happens in Sierra Leone? Will the authorities across the African continent also talk to Madabio, that has been known to be very high-handed? Because there's a great deal of political instability in Sierra Leone. And once a threat happens once, it does not mean that those centripetal or centrifugal forces, like the physicists will say, are not still evident in the polity in Sierra Leone. So let's see how it pans out. He's going to be here with his assistants. They're going to keep watch over him. Let's see how that pans out. But this is just one measure out of it. The most important thing is, when are the Sierra Leoneans going to fix their problem? And when is Madabio going to consolidate on peace? because those elections brought about many problems. And we cannot continue with the wave of coups.
All right.
Okay, here are a number of issues. The major conflict in Sierra Leone is between the All People's Congress, APC, which is led by Ernest Bai Koroma, and then the SLPP, which is a party of the incumbent president, Julius Maada Bio. In 2012, the incumbent president, Julius Maada Bio, had contested against Ernest Bai Koroma, and he lost. So Ernest Bai Koroma got his second term in office, and he was president 2011 to 2018. Having completed his 2 terms, as was the case with Kajan Tayaba before him, of course, the SLPP won, and Julius Maada Bio became president. Earlier in sometime in 2023, there was another general election, which Julius Maada Bio won narrowly. The election was very controversial, and he lost to the SLPP, to the APC. However, members of the APC took to the streets, protested, and all of that. They said he didn't quite win the election. But the turning point in the matter was in November, when a group of dissidents attacked prisons and freed about 1,200 inmates and killed 200 persons in the process. And on the basis of that, the Julius Maada Bio commenced an investigation into what exactly happened. And the outcome was saying, look, the leader of the APC, All People's Congress, as it is called in Sierra Leone, then Ernest Bai Koroma, who after leaving office in 2018 has remained in politics, was behind it. Yesterday, it was arraigned in Magistrate Court number 2 in Freetown. And then, of course, he had 4 count charges of treason against him. Of course, his supporters are not pleased with that. But the ECOWAS Commission had intervened. Omar Toure is the president of the ECOWAS Commission, and he said that they had negotiated with the Sierra Leonean authorities and that there had been an agreement that Ernest Bai Koroma would be allowed to seek asylum in Nigeria. Now, that asylum, Ernest Bai Koroma agreed to it. And the plan, according to the arrangements, is that Ernest Bai Koroma would show up in Nigeria today to begin his asylum. However, the key leg in the matter is that the Sierra Leonean foreign minister, Timothy Kaba, has been quoted as saying that Sierra Leone is not aware of this arrangement. That is a unilateral proposition by the president of the ECOWAS Commission, Omar Toure. But later today, we will know whether, again, there have been further backroom negotiations to agree on Ernest Bai Koroma coming to Nigeria. Now, the ECOWAS Commission gave a number of suggestions, or don't let me say conditions, to the Sierra Leonean authorities. That one, that all charges, administrative or legal, against Ernest Bai Koroma will be dropped once he leaves for Nigeria. 2, that his residencies in Sierra Leone or any part thereof will be protected. 3, that there will be a refund of his medical expenses at the expense of the Sierra Leonean authorities. And that, of course, everything will be done to respect his rights. So if all of these conditions are in place, this is the background, we can have Ernest Bai Koroma arriving in Nigeria at some point today to be a guest of the Nigerian government. And the Nigerian government, the Tinubu administration, has also agreed to host him. Now again, he's not the first man to come to Nigeria. Charles Taylor was here in 2003. And after that crisis in Liberia. In 2017, Nigeria offered Yahya Jammeh of Gambia, exile in Nigeria. He didn't take it up. In 1991, Siad Barre from Somalia, when he ran into trouble in his country, was granted exile in Nigeria. And he was in Nigeria here, in Lagos, until 1995, when he died of a heart attack when he was being rushed to the hospital. Then, of course, another person who has been here is from Liberia, Senator Prince Yomi Johnson, who was involved in the Liberian crisis, the man who ordered that the ear of Samuel Doe should be cut off. Now, he was here. He fled to Nigeria in 1997. In 2014, he went back to his country, and he took part in the elections, and he became a senator at that time. So Nigeria has a record of hosting, these presidents who have problems in their countries. This speaks to a number of things. Number one is the nature of politics in Nigeria. If you have been a president, there's no guarantee that you can be safe. So either on your own or due to circumstances, you may have to leave your country to escape possible reprisals or any kind of persecution. Number two is that elections have always been problematic in Africa. And one of the things we have seen in the example of Sierra Leone is part of the fallout of the poorly managed electoral process in 2023 in Sierra Leone. Aggrieved persons, well, that may not have been proven, are probably the ones who are behind the unrest, the rebellion, the tension in the country. Number three, I think ECOWAS has done well in stepping in to try to stabilize the situation in Sierra Leone. However, the bigger question is for African leaders to look at, again, lessons that they can extract from this, so that you don't have a situation whereby former political leaders, feel threatened, where, leaders insist on keeping themselves in office and position by all means possible. What are the lessons from Sierra Leone? Well, when Ernest Bai Koroma gets to Nigeria, if indeed the ECOWAS Commission and the leaders of ECOWAS, including the chairman, President Tinubu of Nigeria, if they're able to have their way, well, of course, I'm sure it will be welcome in Nigeria. But the Nigerian government has also said it is a temporary stay. It's for a temporary period. But how temporary would that temporary be? But I'm sure the Nigerian government has enough resources to keep him here for as long as he wishes.
I was actually going to center on the amount of money or the cost to the Nigerian state to host former President Koroma. I'm glad that, Dr. Bat is confident that we have more than enough resources. I think we'd like to think that, but in light of generating revenue, we don't want to spend on other people's, but of course, I would want to say that, the first thing on my mind, and I hope that perhaps the government will be transparent with that, would be how much would it cost to the Nigerian state to host a political asylum in the person of the former president of Sierra Leone. Of course, he's not going to get just a normal kind of reception. He's going to have to have a befitting stay here in Nigeria. We're traditionally very good hosts in this country, so I would assume that quite a sizable budget would go into that. But aside from that, it's already been established as to what preceded this decision by ECOWAS and the agreement by Nigeria to play host to the former president of Sierra Leone. It's important to mention, and it's so interesting that there are very similar thread lines with what's happened in Sierra Leone and other countries in Africa, especially as it pertains to our elections. In fact, the lawyer to former President Koroma, Mr. Joseph Kamara, had mentioned that this was an insult to the democratic process of Sierra Leone, because he's described the charges against the former president as trumped-up charges, as being because they're trying to indict him for an attempted coup following what Dr. Bati had described last November, when gunmen attacked or broke into a military armory and several prisons in Freetown, freeing almost 2,000 inmates. Gunshots were heard in the capital, and the fingers pointed to former President Mr. Koroma. Now, he said, in his words, a dark cloud has shadowed the skies of our country, meaning that we are dragging a former head of state on trumped-up charges under a political vendetta. And his argument for this is that if this continues, it sets a bad precedent in terms of the opposition, or when elections are not won, or using the might of state as a political weapon against a political adversary. And so these are some of the challenges that we still have to tackle on the African continent when it comes to elections. I won't say only Africa. I mean, Trump said also that the Biden administration is using these charges against him as a political weapon because he's in opposition. So it happens in countries, even in the most mature of democracies, as we've seen in America. But coming back to Africa, coups, attempted coups, ECOWAS wading in. During the coups of the last year, what we had called on again and again was that beyond condemning coups that take place because of obvious agitations from citizens and mismanagement, as was the case in Sierra Leone as well, the hardship of the people, bad government, corruption and the like, perhaps ECOWAS should also look deeply into that and begin to map out a framework to strengthen democracies on the African continent so that we can see a reduction in incidents like this. Very importantly, to strengthen institutions. If the lawyer of the former president is accusing of the government of trumped up charges, it also means that there's also a challenge with the judiciary in terms of a lack of trust in the judiciary. And that sounds familiar because across the countries in Africa, it seems like one of the key areas that must be looked into is strengthening of institutions to strengthen democratic processes on the African continent. Again, just to mention that the former president of Sierra Leone is not yet here in Nigeria. However, it is very likely that he will be here later today, barring any resistance from the Sierra Leonean government or any disagreements between ECOWAS and the Sierra Leonean government. If that happens, he'll come here for perhaps the next few months, next 1 year. Not sure if he'll then be extradited back to face the crimes he's said to have done in Sierra Leone, or perhaps the Nigerian state and ECOWAS as a whole would give him the protection required because of what they've seen as an attempt to broker peace and bring stability to the West African country of Sierra Leone. I must mention though that in the last few months, ECOWAS has proven its might and its strength as perhaps a voice on the West African part of the continent. We've talked about and criticized a number of times how effective ECOWAS is, how influential on the continent or the West African arm of things are, beyond just settling fights where it comes to coup disputes. Strengthening the economic capacity and potential across the West African border, very important. So it's good to see, the strength, and just see ECOWAS come up when it comes to issues like this. But beyond that, many other areas that they can intervene in to make trade easier on the West African continent, and not just to come in as arbitrators in political disputes in countries during coups and the likes.